Welcome back to Veterans Forum, a program by veterans, about veterans, for veterans and their families. I'm your co-host, Bob West, with Ray Chattery and Jerry Devlin. Jerry's out tonight celebrating his birthday, so we look forward to seeing him in the next show. Our goal is to provide you and your family with important information about legislation, benefits, support, and programs for you and your family by introducing leaders in our community. Ray, who do we have with us today?
Well, it's an honor and privilege to have Christopher Piscatelli. He's the director of the Cemetery and Memorial Program for the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs. Chris began his service with the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs in 1999 as superintendent of the Crownsville Veterans Cemetery. He was promoted to the director of the Cemetery and Memorial Program in November 2008. He provides leadership and direction for 5 state Maryland veteran cemeteries, which are becoming national shrine cemeteries for the state of Maryland, responsible for ensuring dignified burials and perpetual care for the veterans and their eligible dependents. He's also responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of the 4 state Maryland memorials. Before joining Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs, Chris worked 18 years in the private golf course industry. He was assistant superintendent of the Army-Navy Country Club at Woodmont Country Club, Walden Golf Course, and Hunt Valley Country Club, where he was responsible for moving clubs forward in the highest standard of excellence. He's a graduate of the University of Maryland Institute of Applied Agriculture and earned a degree in golf course management. Chris, it's an honor and privilege to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, welcome, Chris. The interesting thing is, I'm a bit familiar with cemeteries, but memorials, I have no idea about these 4 memorials that was mentioned by Ray. Can you tell us a little bit about
Absolutely.
what they are and where they are and that sort of thing?
Okay. First off, we have the World War II Memorial outside of Annapolis, which commemorates those lost their lives during World War II. We also, right across the street from there, we have the Gold Star Families Memorial that is put in place that was just dedicated a year ago by the governor out there. We also have the Vietnam Memorial by Harbor Hospital in Baltimore City, and we have the Korean War Memorial on Boston Street, which is also in Baltimore City.
See, I was kind of familiar with the one that was near the Naval Academy, going out the exit there. I guess that's
Yes.
450.
Correct. That's
Okay.
the World War II, and that's the scenic overlook, the Governor Ritchie Overlook. Also,
Right.
when you first come upon that, that is the Governor Ritchie Overlook, and then right below is the World War II Memorial, where we have the pillars and all the names engraved on the black granite. We also have the globes along the side that show where all the battles and all the conflicts took place in Japan and everything else.
So these memorials are available 24 hours a day? I
Yes,
assume?
they are open to the public
And they're
24
lit?
hours a day. They are lighted out on each site. So there's spires at the Vietnam Memorial, large spires, and again, the names are inscribed on the triangular obelisks that are out there. Any of those individuals that are missing in action, they also have signified them by a triangle on them. And any individuals now that have lost their lives and been found in the recovery, we actually changed it to a circle now so that it identifies that the individual has been found.
Oh, well, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Now, one thing, we're getting into the cemeteries. People are going to wondering that since you have a degree in golf course management, and explain how that really benefits you as in your job as director of the cemeteries.
Absolutely. A lot of this transpires into being able to beautify the cemeteries and making them national shrines. A lot of this is saying, you know, you're out there constantly disturbing the earth, and now we're trying to recover the grounds and being able to have the turf that keeps the look of the cemeteries between the trees and expansions that we go through and constantly disturbing the grounds, and making sure the staff have an understanding and training with partnership through the federal VA. They also help provide training for our staff. We're actually coming out to our sites and we're working with them diligently, trying to bring our standards up at the cemeteries and constantly grooming them and making sure that it is a national shrine for those veterans and their family members to be able to come and visit.
Now, we're familiar, of course, with Cheltenham as,
Yes.
as our closest cemetery. And there's one in Crownsville, I believe.
That's correct.
And there's two others, three others?
Three others.
Three others.
We have one in Owings Mills, Garrison Forest. That's actually one of our largest cemeteries. They do over 1,200 interments a year. In the program itself, we do over 3,400 interments a year. We are the largest state veteran cemetery program in the nation. Currently, we actually have over 100,000 individuals interred in our cemeteries. We also have one out in Allegheny County, Rocky Gap Veteran Cemetery, which is currently undergoing an expansion now. So if you would, they are a full-service cemetery where we have columbarium and in-ground cremains in place. They also are going to be having pre-placed crypts, which helps expand the life of the cemetery. The footprint becomes smaller, but it also allows us to keep the cemeteries open for at least 60 to 100 years. And that's our goal in the program with the Secretary George Owings currently is pushing to acquire more ground and make sure the cemeteries stay open for those future veterans and their family members. But we also have a cemetery on the Eastern Shore, which is Hurlock. They also just went under an expansion at that cemetery and now are currently a full service cemetery, if you will.
Well, Jerry always tells us he has a reservation, but he's not anxious to move in quite yet. So, but I think that's a pretty important program for families and veterans to know about, which is basically being able to get your paperwork together and get it down to the cemetery. Can you give us a little bit of information about how that program works and to kind of help some veterans who would like to submit documentation to get their reservation, if you will, in place?
Absolutely. We have a pre-interment application that we allow the family members, either they can go onto our website, which is veterans.maryland.gov, and they can go on there and find in our pre-interment application. On that application, it's very simple. It's asking for which of the 5 cemeteries you're choosing to go to. The qualifying veteran then submits the discharge information, like a DD-214. They then submit that to the cemetery of their choice. They will get back a letter from us basically stating that you have pre-qualified for the cemeteries. But with that understanding is if for some reason that their qualification were to change at the time of burial or at the time of need, whether it be the spouse or the veteran themselves. And again, as long as the veteran qualifies, the dependent or spouse qualifies to be interred. And it does not matter whether the dependent passes first or the veteran passes first. As long as the veteran qualifies, they are eligible for burial in our cemeteries. And we would send a letter back to the family. We would hold the documents at the cemetery. So if something ever happened in the future and you were to need those documents again, we would then also be housing them for you. And that's what we really try and push for, is to say, get that pre-application into us as soon as you can. There's a lot of guardsmen that are still out there that have now been deployed that are actually giving us copies of their discharges so that we have them, because it's nothing worse than the family member having to come at that time of need and trying to search for that paperwork and they cannot find it. It makes it nice and easier transition for the family to be able to go ahead and order honors and, you know, be able to come to the cemeteries without that pressure.
Well, we know as a service organization, sometimes at the hour of need, families do call and say, how do we get this information and documentation? And obviously that's the wrong time for that to occur, but yeah, unfortunately it does from time to time. Now, when are the cemeteries typically open?
The cemeteries are actually open 365 days a year. We do not close down. Even when the state of Maryland has been closed down, we are still there at the cemeteries making sure that the very next day we are able to do burials. The only time we actually cancel services would be as if the family chooses to cancel them. We have been open, we have not closed. Just to kind of circle back on the fact that you were asking about the pre-application and getting the discharge, we actually have a verification specialist on our staff that actually will go out and do the research for the family at that time of need. They are going through a federal system and getting that information or requesting it from St. Louis. So if there is a need ever, the family can then reach out to the funeral director. The funeral director has our verification specialist number. They will contact her and she will do that work for the family. But again, the onus is still upon the family to have that information, because again, we cannot schedule a burial until that information is provided to us. Everybody's a general until you show me the paperwork. But yeah, with respect to the cemeteries, we are open again 365 days a year. We do interments Monday through Friday, basically between the hours of 10 and 3 p.m. Any other time we are open from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. Memorial Day we are open until 8 at that point.
And I noticed once in a while we had members of the Purple Heart that were here, and they usually are down there sometimes over the holiday, like Christmas or New Year's or something like that.
Thanksgiving.
To help at Thanksgiving.
Yes, and they will help fill in and help members, family coming in to find grave sites like that on Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. They come in and help. But our staff is always there to be able to help family members even during those times. So we do fill those roles. But yeah, absolutely, volunteers are vital in all of our programs that we have throughout the department. And you know, it's been a big push for us, especially during Memorial Day and putting all the flags out. We have Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, sometimes 500, 600, you know, Rolling Thunder that comes out. The folks from UPS, Northrop Grumman come out. I mean, there's folks that volunteer all the time, and it's really fantastic to see.
Well, I was kind of surprised because I've done wreaths across America a couple of times.
Yes.
Up in Crownsville. And a couple of years ago, it took a few hours to get all the wreaths out. This last time, there was a traffic jam getting to the cemetery. And by the time we actually found a place and parked and got over to where they're having a brief ceremony, the ceremony was almost over. And there were so many people there, it took us a while to even find a box that needed to have some wreaths placed. And I think we were done in like 15 minutes or something. It was just remarkable one year to the next.
Yeah, and each year that program continues to grow. Like you said, it's a fantastic story, you know, and unfortunately that's the hardest thing for us, is trying to find enough parking and getting folks in there. And we're constantly opening the cemetery at earlier and earlier times to be able to get these folks in. But yeah, this year, 3 of our sites almost completely covered each of the grave sites. I believe they did come back to Crownsville and actually finished up and were able to cover all of the sites from another individual that privately went out and purchased wreaths on his own or through Home Depot and donations and things like that. But yeah, each of one of our sites is constantly growing, and that's where the volunteer groups come in, and they are responsible for helping putting the wreaths out, making sure those individuals, family members, if they donated a specific wreath, that wreath is put onto that grave. Also, the other side of that is those volunteers coming back and helping us pick up. Because when you stop and think, there's almost 30,000 wreaths that are going to be placed out on that one cemetery. And now for us to be able to come and put them, you know, respectfully, not just throwing them away, so to speak, but they're being recycled through a lot of folks and stuff like that. So that's a big help. But the volunteer program, we couldn't do it without those folks.
Yeah, the American Legion here in town is the one that kind of honchos that program for us. And every year it's sort of like, you know, we really appreciate your help in putting the wreaths out, but we really need help. You know, a few weeks later when we need to have them picked up.
Yeah,
So.
and same thing with the flags and everything at the cemeteries, is placing all the flags out at each one of the sites and then having to come back and respectfully put them back so that next year everything's ready to go.
Well, and I can imagine, now that you were talking about the turf and the abuse of the turf, actually, by not only vehicles, but I was thinking of those thousands of people that walked around on that day. And usually around here at that time, it's not really cold, so it's kind of like muddy and stuff. So I can imagine what it must have looked like after
this
that
past
event.
year, it's been very difficult, obviously, with all the rains and everything else. The staff have done a fantastic job in grooming the sites. I mean, that all goes towards, again, the training and working with the federal VA folks and bringing our folks, you know, into the 21st century with the newer equipment. We're putting less of a footprint on. We're not using as large of equipment, things along those, more dignified burials compared to what it was done years ago.
Now, you were talking about veterans and their spouses. What specifically are the eligibility requirements to be interred at a cemetery?
To be interred in the cemetery, the veteran needs to have an honorable discharge. Whether it be a general discharge or under honorable conditions, that's fine. As long as it's not then less than honorable, those individuals are qualified to be interred in the cemeteries. And again, with the spouse or dependents, a spouse, obviously they need to be married. There is same-sex marriage now, so again, within that state that they do allow for marriage, and it cannot be what you would say is the common law marriage or anything like that. And a dependent, again, as long as it is dependent under the age of 26 or pursuing higher education at that point, those individuals are eligible. But children that have serious birth defects like Down syndrome or something that incapacitates them to become dependent upon the veteran, those individuals are also eligible to be buried in the cemeteries.
Now, is there a requirement to be to live in Maryland, or do you have to be born here, or what's the requirement as far as that is concerned? Because I'm sure you don't take people from Pennsylvania who want to come down here because it's a little warmer.
Understood. Yes, we are the State of Maryland Veteran Cemetery Program. So obviously our thing is we are looking for those Maryland veterans to be interred in our cemeteries. You either have your home of record be Maryland, you're currently living here, or you have lived here for a period of 2 years. So you could have lived here for a period of 20 years, moved out of state, and we would just ask that you provide that residency. Again, it goes back to the pre-application and having that in our sites and having that already in place so that we don't then have to go doing the research for that, because a lot of folks, again, if you've moved out and it's been 20 years, and how are you going to be able to provide that documentation with us? Again, it goes back to tax records. There's multiple ways that families can do that, but a lot of it is, you know, through the discharge and being the home of record for those individuals, or they're currently living here now.
Now, at one time, or does the War Memorial still handle or keep DD-214s on file?
Yes, the War Memorial, which is also under my purview, and I also have the Washington Confederate Cemetery, but the War Memorial Building does house all the World War II veterans' discharges. So at any point in time is a Maryland veteran that was in the service, those records are housed there, and the funeral home or the family can get those records, and we provide those to the families.
No one after World War II?
No one after World War II, that's correct.
Okay.
There is a period of time now that they have made a change that the veteran now has to actually check a box on their discharge to say, I do not want the state of Maryland to get a copy of my discharge. So that's a recent change, which is a good thing, because now we are housing that and they are being housed electronically. So after World War II, there was that period of time where the veteran actually had to check a box to say, I want the state of Maryland to have a copy of my records, and a lot of folks didn't. It was either going out the door or checking that box, and I think going out the door was a little quicker fashion
yes, it
at
was.
this time.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, we know that.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's what was happening, especially in getting your VA benefits. And I experienced it myself with my first enlistment, which was basically, I'm fine, I just want to get off the base and go home. And wherever you want me to sign, I'll just sign. And I understand now that that's changed, and you need to opt out of these programs instead of opt in, which is far better, because as you get older, you have to make sure those records are in place so you can get the benefits that you deserve. So yeah, I'm thrilled that they have that kind of a program.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, they've gone electronic with all of this, because I know that a lot of folks have concerns with St. Louis and housing the records. There was a lot of records that were burnt up in the fires. But again, they can go and reconstruct a lot of those documents. And even so, when we get to that point, it would go up to the FBI and actually doing the research, and then it comes to our department to acknowledge and say, okay, this is a record that was burnt up in the fires. And the onus basically comes on us at that point. And we give the benefit of the doubt to the veteran at that point, and allowing them to be interred in our cemeteries.
Are there any costs for to get into the cemeteries at all? Does the family have to pay anything to the cemetery program? I know, of course, when they go to the funeral home, there's their charges, but any charge after that?
At the cemetery program, there is no cost for the veteran. That includes the marker, the grave liner, perpetual care. There is a cost for the dependent or spouse. Currently, it is $762 right now. It changes every October the 1st. Basically, we follow what the federal guideline is set for reimbursement. If a family member were to go to a private cemetery for interment of a veteran, they then would be reimbursed that same amount of money. So every October the 1st, whatever the cost is for reimbursement of a veteran, that's what we're charging for the dependent to be buried in our cemetery programs.
Now, if the dependent is pre-applied, do they pay that fee then, or?
No, everything is paid at that point in time, unfortunately. Because again, I can't know when somebody's going to pass. It could be another 20 years, but again, we do not have the ability to take that monies up front or anything like that.
Because I know some people who do the pre-need, and then you're right, 20 or 30 years later, and all of a sudden there's some additional costs because that initial pre-need didn't cover everything.
Right, and that's why we try and avoid that. I mean, again, it's a minimal cost, $762 currently right now, compared to a private cemetery where you're probably going to pay $5,000, $6,000 minimum at the sites. But then there is no more cost at that point. But it does include the marker, it includes the liner. So it includes everything the same with a veteran, but that is the only cost that they will ever incur.
A lot of people are being cremated now. Is there, I didn't notice down at Charlotte Hall, is there or Cheltenham? You're a little bit early for Charlotte Hall.
A little early.
Cheltenham. If there was like a wall or something for cremains, I guess they're called?
Yes, we have a columbarium at Cheltenham currently. We're getting ready to start the next expansion at that site. We're under design at this point. But there is the columbarium, the niches, if you will, where the cremains can be placed on. And also we have in-ground cremation spaces for those veterans and family members.
Yeah, I saw that once at Arlington, and because I was kind of surprised, that the individual was cremated, and they actually, put the ashes right in a regular burial plot. So I was kind of surprised about that.
How much liaison is there between your office and the funeral director?
On each case, I mean, we will talk with those funeral homes or funeral directors multiple times before the interment, because we're getting the information from the family members. We're making sure that we have all the documents in place, whether it be the discharge, the death certificates, transit permits, and everything. But we're in contact with them almost on a daily basis. The biggest thing is making sure we have that documentation up front so that it doesn't slow anything down, and when we have it, then we're scheduling those interments at that point. Kind of circling back to saying about the columbarium and cremation, the cremation rate actually is increasing quite a bit. A lot of our other sites are almost at 50%. I mean, so that's a huge amount of individuals that are choosing cremation and coming to our sites.
Now the flag and the honor guard, who actually arranges for that?
By law, if the family requests that from the funeral home, they are the individuals that will go ahead and retrieve the flag and also arrange for military honors with that branch of service. So by federal law, they are required to, if the family requests it. Again, the family does not have to have honors if they choose not to. That's a personal thing on their choice. But it is up to the funeral director to arrange for that. If it is a family coming to us with cremations or something that they're handling themselves, we will assist the families at that point, because basically all burial flags actually come from the U.S. Post Office. And they have burial flag applications, and the families would go there, and that's where the funeral homes get them from also. But arranging for military honors, again, it goes to that branch of service that that member was in.
I didn't know they came from the post office.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, whenever the remains leaves the funeral home and goes to, say, we'll say use Cheltenham, there is no graveside service. It's a chapel service only, right?
That is correct. We have shelters at each one of our sites because, again, with the equipment and everything out there and the staff and the safety of the family members, again, they can go to the site and witness the interment, as the funeral director would also be doing, and verifying that the grave site and there is a temporary marker put out in place until the actual headstone arrives. But yes, we do have all the ceremonies take place in the shelters. We do not do anything at a gravesite. Again, we can do up to 6 interments each day at each one of our sites. And again, if it's 6 interments all in a row, at that point, it would be unsafe for the family members to be out there working with the equipment that we do. And again, we don't want to harm anybody, but they can witness the interment at that point in time.
How long of a, sometimes at Arlington, for example, they're backed up months. What kind of a situation do you have currently?
Currently, right now, at each one of our sites, if we have an open slot, we will allow that family member to take those times. A lot of times families do not want to take the early times, but again, we can get backed up about 2 weeks period of time. Those are at the Cheltenham and Garrison Forest sites. That's kind of where it runs, but again, it just depends on week to week, and if we have open slots and the family members are wanting to take those times, they are there and available, absolutely.
That's pretty good, because
Right.
normally we hear, for some people they might have to wait a few weeks or something like that.
Now, one thing that I've always encouraged on the programs is for the veteran to go and get their DD-214 documented at the Register of Wills at Upper Marlboro. And this way it's on file, and it's the Freedom of Information Act. It has to be a family member only that can get that DD-214. Now, does that help you?
Yeah, absolutely. If we have that on record, it makes it easier for the family at the time of need. But again, the pre-application is the key to our whole success on this. And even now, the federal government has finally stepped up and said they are going to do pre-need for the families. And if they do pre-need, we can get a copy of those paperwork also when the family. So it's not a waiting process. And you go back to the fact of, you're saying, well, how long would it take? If you have all the documentation in place and that day you would like the interment the next day, we actually can do the interment the next day if we have an open slot. So there is no waiting in a lot of cases. You know what I mean? It's sometimes the family wanting to wait for a longer period to get the family members in, that type of thing.
Well, look at that. Here's a way for you could get your reservation in early, and they'll reserve a slot for you. So we want to thank once again the Director for Cemeteries and Memorials, Christopher Piscitelli. Thank you. And we thank you for watching this version of Veterans Forum. Now we ask you to get involved with your local veterans by stopping by the local American Legion or the DAV. Find out about the benefits that you have earned. And family members are encouraged to come too. And also we have a service officer available at the DAV on Monday evenings from 7 to 9. No reservation in advance is required. So stop by and find out about the types of things that are available to you by being active within your own community service organizations. And once again, we want to thank you all for watching Veterans Forum.